Hello and welcome to this video on inductive and deductive arguments. This is a topic that is covered in section 1.3 of our textbook. Let us begin with a review of arguments. This is a basic summary of what we've gone over in sections 1.1 and 1.2 so far. Keep in mind that arguments are not discussions or debates. We use this word in everyday language to mean discussions of debates, but in this class we do not mean that. In this class, in logic, we mean that arguments are a group or set of statements intended to prove one other statement. And also keep in mind that these parts have names. The premises are the statements that are being used to prove the conclusion. In other words, the conclusion is the thing that is being proven. Also keep in mind that there's a list of passages or statements that are not arguments or non-arguments, and some of the ones we discussed are warning statements, statements of belief or opinion, or loosely associated statements. And actually the list is a lot longer than that. And then also keep in mind that there are conclusion and premise indicators, and these are words that tell us that a conclusion is about to follow. Example of conclusion indicators are words like therefore. Example of premise indicators are words like since or because. Okay, let's get to the distinction between inductive and deductive arguments. In an inductive argument, the truth of the conclusion, that is to say whether the conclusion is true or false, depends on chance and contingency. The idea of chance here is basically that things could happen a certain way, but they could change and then happen a different way. Whereas in deductive arguments, the truth of the conclusion, that is to say whether the conclusion is true or false, does not depend on chance or contingency, but rather on the idea of necessity. And we'll explore the idea of necessity in just a bit. Okay, let's start with inductive arguments. So as I've already said, in inductive arguments, the truth of the conclusion, that is to say whether the conclusion is true or false, depends on chance and contingency. The question now is, what is chance? What does contingency mean? So chance basically means that things could be otherwise, that things are subject to change, and that also is basically what contingency means. So let's look at some examples of inductive arguments, and I'm going to do my best to bring out this idea of chance and contingency in these examples. For the last 10 years, I have driven to work 5 days a week. In those 10 years, it has always taken me 30 minutes to get to work. Tomorrow, I will drive to work. Therefore, tomorrow, it will take me 30 minutes to get to work. Okay, first of all, let's point out what the conclusion is. The conclusion here is tomorrow, it will take me 30 minutes to get to work, right? We know that there's the indicator word therefore that tells us that that's the conclusion, or signals that that's the conclusion. Okay, so the question now is, why is it that that conclusion, tomorrow it will take me 30 minutes to get to work, is a matter of chance or contingency? In other words, why is it that that conclusion could be true or could be false? Well, it all depends on what happens tomorrow, right? What happens tomorrow is up to chance. It's subject to change. We could have a terrible storm and it'll take me an hour to get to work, or there could be an accident and it will take me an hour to get to work, or more than an hour. All these events can change, and that's what we mean when we mean by chance or contingency. And so the conclusion could be false even if the premises are true. That is to say, even if it's taken me 30 minutes to get to work for the last 10 years, that conclusion could very well be false, and that is because it is up to chance or contingency, or maybe in this case luck. Okay? Let's look at another example. Joe's car is a great handling car. Joe owns a 2010 Toyota Corolla. I am going to buy a 2010 Toyota Corolla. Therefore, the 2010 Toyota Corolla that I'm going to buy will be a great handling car. Okay, let's get the conclusion out of the way. The conclusion here is that the 2010 Toyota Corolla that I'm going to buy will be a great handling car, right? Why is this conclusion a matter of chance or contingency? Well, again, it all depends on chance, in the sense that the car that I'm about to buy could have been in an accident, right? And that accident could have affected the way that it handles. It could actually be a bad handling car because it was in an accident. There's also the chance that it was just manufactured badly, right? It's what people sometimes call a lemon. If that's the case, then it's not going to be a great handling car if that affects how it drives. So notice again that the point here is that this conclusion could be false, or it could be true, and it all depends on chance, on the way things turn out. Okay, let's talk about deductive arguments now. So again, in deductive arguments, whether the conclusion is true or false does not depend on probability, chance, or contingency. So what does the truth of the conclusion depend on if it's not chance or contingency? Well, in deductive arguments, the truth of the conclusion depends on the idea of necessity, and this is opposed to the idea of chance or contingency. This raises the question, what is necessity? And the best way to understand necessity here is to think of examples in mathematics. Definitions in mathematics are many times a matter of necessity. So a triangle is by definition or necessarily three-sided, right? The fact that a triangle has three sides is not a matter of chance or contingency, right? It's not possible for a triangle to have four sides if chance changes, right? We know that it will always have three sides, and the always having three sides is a matter of necessity. It has to be that way, right? Okay, so in order for us to understand how this works in deductive arguments, we have to know that in well-reasoned deductive arguments, if the premises are true, the conclusion must be true. And this idea that the conclusion must be true is that idea of necessity. Another way of saying this is that in a well-reasoned deductive argument, if the premises are true, it is impossible for the conclusion to be false. So this helps us understand the idea of necessity when it comes to arguments. Let's look at an example. The Statue of Liberty is in New York City. New York City is in the United States. Therefore, the Statue of Liberty is in the United States. So if we look at the conclusion is that the Statue of Liberty is in the United States. We see that it has to follow, given that those premises are true. And in this case, we know that those premises are true, right? So if it is true that the Statue of Liberty is in New York City, and it is true that New York City is in the United States, then it has to be the case that the Statue of Liberty is in the United States. In order to better understand this, think about cases in which the premises are false. Even in cases where the premises are false, the conclusion has to follow if the argument is well reasoned. Here's an example. The Statue of Liberty is in Berlin, Germany. Berlin, Germany is in Africa. Therefore, the Statue of Liberty is in Africa. Okay, we know that this is a deductive argument because the conclusion has to follow if the premises are true. So again, in this case, we know that they're false, but the test of whether the argument is well reasoned depends on that if, right? If it were the case that the Statue of Liberty was in Berlin, and if it were the case that Berlin, Germany was in Africa, it would have to be the case. It would have to follow that the Statue of Liberty is in Africa. So this tells us exactly why an argument like this has to be deductive. That idea of necessity is in the background. Okay. But what happens if the premises are true yet the conclusion is false? Does the argument cease to be deductive? The answer to this question is no. What is going on in such an argument is that it is just poorly reasoned. It is not a well-reasoned argument. We're going to spend time in one of our videos coming up where we'll talk about validity, which is basically the idea that arguments are well-reasoned. But we know that an argument that has true premises and a false conclusion is deductive because there was an attempt to make it follow, except the person failed. Basically, the person didn't reason well, and that's why the conclusion does not follow. Let's look at an example of that. All banks are financial institutions. Merrill Lynch is a financial institution, therefore Merrill Lynch is a bank. Okay, we have a case here where the premises are true. Merrill Lynch, by the way, is not a bank. It's an investment company. But it is a financial institution. But the conclusion is false then, right? That Merrill Lynch is a bank. So what has happened here is the person has categorized this in a way where they made a mistake. They've put Merrill Lynch inside the category of a bank by mistake when they engaged in this reasoning, and that's why they were led to this conclusion, which is just false. So basically the point here is that even if they are badly reasoned, this does not cease to be deductive. It's just a poorly reasoned deductive argument because there's an attempt here to make the conclusion follow from the premises. Okay, so the key here to distinguishing inductive from deductive arguments is to ask yourself whether the conclusion is a matter of chance or contingency, or whether it's a matter of necessity. If it's contingency or chance, remember it will be inductive, and if it's a matter of necessity, it will be deductive. The question now is, why does all this matter? Well, there are two reasons. There are practical reasons and philosophical reasons. The practical reasons are that when people make claims, are they doing so from an inductive or a deductive based argument? Think about the claims they are making and think about their conclusions. Are they concluding based on contingency or chance? If that's the case, then they are making an inductive argument, and then we really have reason to doubt their conclusions, right? There's more room for doubt. So a bit of skepticism can arise here, and skepticism is a very healthy thing in logic, very healthy thing in critical thinking. Okay, the philosophical reasons are interesting as well. Philosophers have always asked about the possibility of knowledge without experience or without verification from experience. This is what they've called a priori knowledge. And deductive reasoning is a way of attaining that kind of knowledge. Mathematical knowledge, for example, would be knowledge that consists in this idea of necessity. As we've seen, triangles have by necessity a certain amount of sides. And so philosophers have always asked, is it possible to have this kind of knowledge outside of mathematics in philosophy? And that implies a kind of metaphysical knowledge. Is it possible for us to have a knowledge that speculates beyond what we can see, beyond the things that have to do with contingency or chance? So there are philosophical reasons for this distinction. Okay, that is it for this video. Thank you for joining me. In our next video, we are going to start looking at deductive types of arguments. So we're going to focus only on those types or forms